Okay, we left off in Revelation chapter 13. We're down to verse 11. And so we're at the time, I had this written on the board over there last week, but we got there right at the end, and so I didn't have an opportunity to explain what I've written on the board. Well, we're at that place right now. In chapter 13, we've already seen the beginning of that 13th chapter. The dragon's standing on the sand on the seashore, and he's calling up a beast out of the sea. And the beast out of the sea represents what kind of anti-Christian, anti-God creature, activity, people. What are we talking about here when we talk about the beast out of the sea?
False revelation?
Okay, not yet. It's the false prophet's going to be the beast out of the land. Okay? And that's why I'm glad we're reviewing this, because it can get a little confusing because the two beasts work together. In fact, let me step one step back even further. One of the questions I got last week, in fact, a couple of people brought this up, because some translations in verse 1 will say the dragon, or will say I and the dragon and I, or something like that. There are some manuscripts that have the and I, but most don't, so most leave it out. It's just focused on the dragon. But if the I is there, that would represent John just watching this. And if you picture in your mind John as like the audience of one, every time the curtains are pulled back and we see all these visions and everything, and so repeatedly throughout the book of Revelation, he's told to write these things down. So he's the one person who gets to take all this in and write it down. There's only been one thing so far that he got to see or hear, and he was told, now don't write that one down. Do you remember what that one was? Voice of the Seven Thunders. The voice of the Seven Thunders. And so we don't know what that is, so we'll go on. But everything else he's writing down. So that would be John's perspective there. But we've got the dragon back in chapter 12, verse 9. We get 4 names of the dragon. One's dragon. And the other 3 names are serpent, Satan, devil. So we know who he is. All in one verse there tells us. So here we have the dragon at the beginning of the 13th chapter. When he's why call him the dragon and not the serpent?
Depends on what you're trying to emphasize.
Yeah. And what are we trying to emphasize when we picture Satan as a dragon?
Power.
Yeah. Okay, I probably shouldn't even say this. Well, what do you picture when you picture a dragon? Nobody picture Puff the Magic One? Fire-breathing, wings, horrid creature, right? Thought dawned on me, you know when that kind of rendition of dragons, when that was developed?
Dark Age.
Medieval, Dark Ages, things like that. So what in the world did they mean back in the 1st century when they used this term? In fact, I should have checked what it said on the Hebrew in the Old Testament. In the Greek, you know what the word literally means for dragon? It means massive or frightful snake. So you got the serpent and you got the big old nasty serpent. So since it's big, frightful, nasty, I don't think we're too far off with our mental image of a dragon. Just know that what most of us have in mind is probably not what they were thinking in the 1st century. But nonetheless, we think of, he's pictured as dragon oppressive. We're thinking about persecution. Well, that's perfect for what we're going to be picturing here in the 13th chapter. Because he's going to call up two main beasts, right? He's going to call up 2 main beasts. One beast out of the sea, one beast from the land. Well, this makes perfect sense because our battle's not against flesh and blood, right? It's satanic powers that we're fighting against, but those satanic powers come through people and come through all sorts of different things. So this, I think, is a beautiful picture to give insight to the church because, yeah, we know we're fighting Satan, but you know what that's going to look like? It's going to look like oppressive political powers or political persecution. In fact, he's going to spell out a little bit of that. That's the first beast, the beast out of the sea. We're getting ready to look at the beast that later on in chapter 19 is going to just come right out and say, this beast is the false prophet. Right? So since he tells us a little bit later on, let's just go ahead and bring that right out right now. So Satan's going to use political power. Does that mean that every political power is satanic? No. Does that mean some political power is satanic? Definitely. Definitely. He can use stuff like that. Okay, the obvious examples of this would be like Hitler and Stalin and Mao Zedong and things like that. However, we know that Satan often likes to appear as an angel of light. Sometimes some of your favorite, your and my favorite political figures that, wow, man, aren't they great? Sometimes we put too much hope in them and Satan lures us right in and think, yeah, if we just had all the politics straight, life would be good. No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. And that's one of the ways Satan works. Anyway, through political forces, but he especially works through false religion, false prophet. People who misrepresent God. And that's the section we're at. Now, the reason I want to put this up here, you could probably make a better, longer list, but these are just some of the obvious things. What happens in the 13th chapter with this beast that comes from the land that we're getting ready to read about, what happens with this beast is, it's like he's mimicking the two witnesses that we saw back in chapter 11. Now, two witnesses, again, it's easy to get down this path. Oh, we're talking about Elijah and Moses. Why? Because calling fire out of heaven, able to turn the water into blood, able to prevent the rain. Those are things that Elijah and Moses did. Okay, but it's not Elijah and Moses. They are examples of what? The two witnesses are examples of what? And the two witnesses represent what? Us, God's people, those who are faithful. Elijah and Moses are great examples of that. But remember when he likens them to the olive trees, right? And the oil from the olive tree back in the first chapter that provides the oil for the lampstands. The lampstand represents God's people, the churches. Letters to the 7 churches. Okay. The parallel here, these would be faithful to God, right? Christians and godly people have been faithful to God versus the false prophet, those who twist and distort God's word. Well, what do? It says the two witnesses encourage people to worship God. They pronounce the message. They boldly get it out there because they want people to worship God. What does the false prophet do? He gets people indirectly to worship the dragon by worshiping the dragon's image. We're going to see that in just a few minutes. And I find it so significant, in case I forget to mention this later, the dragon doesn't go directly, hey, worship me. Right? Satan is happy for us to worship something else and never realize that we're playing into Satan. That's part of his MO. That's the way he works. Right? Okay, so to worship the dragon, the two witnesses are able to perform miracles at different times throughout history. God's people were able to perform miracles on God's behalf to verify the message, right? Well, this false prophet is able to perform wonders, miraculous signs. Okay? What's next here? I can't read this. Oh, stands before the Lord representing their authority. They have the authority of God. They speak on behalf of God, right? This one's given the authority from the first beast. The first beast and the second beast work hand in hand. And they encourage people to worship. Okay, instead of just saying first and second beast, can I say it this way? False religion actually encourages people to support bad government. And bad government actually supports and encourages bad religion. I hope we can put meat on the bones a little bit later, but that's one of the strong messages that comes out. They call fire down from heaven. Well, it's interesting, so does false prophet. I hope we see the significance of that in just a few verses too. They're murdered. Everybody celebrates. It's like Christmas time because we finally killed the two witnesses. Because when they spoke, what came out of their mouths? Fire. Yeah, burned people up. Yeah. So the what came out of the mouth of good, godly people actually antagonizes some people. It's life to some people, and it's death to other people. Right? So they wanted to silence the witnesses, they did, but guess what? After they celebrated them being dead in the streets, they came back to life. Came back, well, that's what the false prophet is going to do too. He's going to breathe life into the image that's going to be used to help worship the dragon. I know some of this might seem like, getting lost in the details here. I'm hoping that as we go through these verses, it will become much more clear. He also has 2 horns of a lamb. So many times already in the book of Revelation we've read about the horns, right? And the horns represent power. And sometimes we're talking about 10 horns, sometimes 7 horns. In this case, it's 2 horns, and it's specified horns of a lamb. So he does exercise power, but why a lamb? Because Matthew chapter 7 says, beware of wolves in sheep's clothing. What's he talking about? He's talking about false teachers in the Sermon on the Mount. That's the picture that he uses. Well, Satan wants to come off like a lamb, but he's not. Okay, we already know that, but that's the overall comparison. Chapter 11 kind of brings that to mind, and it brings us to where we are here in chapter 13. Chapter 13, verse 11 says, then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. First one came out of the water, and that would represent, by the way, how do we know it represented political powers? We're not just taking a guess here. How do we know that first beast that came out of the water? Here's the hint. What did it look like? Okay, it had all these horns and everything, but what animals did it look like? Lion, leopard, bear, and then a really scary looking beast. But we've got the lion, the leopard, the bear, a scary looking beast. Where have we seen that before in the Bible? In the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, he explains that the lion represents Babylon. The bear is lopsided and represents what? The Medes and the Persians. And then the leopard represents Greece. Represents major world powers coming. And after he points those out in the book of Daniel, he says there's still one yet to come. Well, okay, we've got the perspective of history. We know after Babylon comes the Medo-Persian Empire. Then the Greeks come next, and then after them, and the Romans. Okay, so anyway, we just use Scripture to interpret Scripture. And we already know that these images are used to talk about political forces that, by the way, Satan used very effectively to persecute God's people. Right? I'm so tempted to get sucked into these things, but in between the Testaments, but in between the Testaments, after that Alexander the Great dies, remember his generals take over and they split up the territory and everything? Well, the generals, this is many years later, but there's infighting and all sorts of stuff. But the ones who are fighting over the land of Palestine, the land of Canaan, oh my, there's a general, a leader by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. Have you heard about him before? What did he do to the Jewish people? What did he do to the temple? Remember this? He didn't destroy the temple. He came in and he set up an altar to Zeus. And he offered a pig. Why a pig? That's about as in your face to Jewish people as you can get. And so it led to what historically is referred to as the Maccabean Revolt, where this clan of the Maccabees, Judas Maccabees, and I forget all the guys' names in the family, but it was kind of like, this is just enough. And there was fighting went on for a long time, but there was a lot of persecution through all these different political forces, and that's how we know that's what we're talking about. Here we know that the beast of the land, it does represent the false prophet, because a little bit later he comes right out and says that. So in that perspective, I think it helps us understand a little bit better what these verses are telling us. He says the second beast coming out of the earth, it had 2 horns like a lamb. So it's emphasizing power again, but the fact that it appears as a lamb, and we know it's a false prophet, I think it's to me, it's like, watch out, because it's going to try to look really good. In fact, if you don't look deep, if you don't look beneath the surface, you might get sucked right in. You might write out a check and send it in and help support these people that pretend to be representing God. I know I've told you this before, but there was a television evangelist years ago from Akron, Ohio. Sorry, Buckeye people. But he finished he said all sorts of things. Oh, so bothered me, but a lot of what he said came right out of the Bible. And he was a pretty good preacher on some points, but the more you listen to him, it's like a lot of good, and then, how much manure does it take in the glass before you're not ready to drink that water anymore? How much bad stuff do you have to have there? But the end of his show, the way his show ended, he's in a white suit, and there's the camera, and he's turned, not full profile, but kind of like this, in this white 3-piece suit. And as the camera starts to back away, you see more than his face, and you see clouds. It's like the sky, clouds, right? And as the camera backs away and gets a little bit further, he's standing on a pillar. He's on a pillar in the clouds, in the heavens. And I'm like, this guy's claiming deity or these angelic presence, or I'm sorry, get sidetracked. But there have been so many different examples of people who claim to speak on behalf of God, but Satan is really effectively worked through them. Okay, he had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. The dragon is who? Satan. And when Satan speaks, how does he speak? Lies. Thank you. So don't get in your mind, oh, we had a powerful opposing voice. No. He had a sly, deceptive voice. He spoke in such a way as to lure a lot of people in. But he spoke like the father of lies, because he's working for the dragon. It exercised all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. I'm so thankful he repeated this, because I didn't deal with this earlier in the chapter. The 13th chapter, I think I went over this a little too quickly. The first beast represents what? Political powers, thank you. And it says that this beast had a wound like it died and came back to life. Okay, that's not going to surprise us at all, because Satan wants to pretend like, he wants to mimic the good, right? But political forces who died and looked like they came back to life. In John's day, the Caesar at that time was a guy named Domitian. And he had the nickname of Nero, because they believed he was Nero come back to life. So it's kind of like, is he really Domitian, or is this really Nero again come back to life? Well, again, this seems like a apocalyptic code way of talking about the emperor at that time. Did the Roman Empire persecute Christians? One of the major things they did was called Caesar worship. Have we talked about that before? Where at many different places, some places it was worse than others, but anywhere in the Roman Empire, a soldier could approach any person. Didn't have to be a Roman citizen or not. You're in the Roman Empire. They could approach anybody, and they could say, they could come up to you and say, pay allegiance to Caesar. And the way you paid allegiance to Caesar was you took a pinch of incense, put it on the hot coals, and said, Caesar is Lord. The Christians wouldn't do that. And people knew Christians wouldn't do that. And so sometimes they purposefully put them on the spot, because the punishment could range from imprisonment to put you to death on the spot. or ship you back to Rome, be put in the games. So that was part of the Caesar worship. Okay? I forget which verse I'm on. 12. I'm on 12. Okay, thank you. Okay, spoke like a lion. Okay, worship the one who had the fatal wound and be healed. That's verse 12. Verse 13. And it performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of people. Okay, fire is typically used, it's been used throughout the book of Revelation, but it's typically used to signify judgment. Can you think of the times when fire came out of heaven in the Bible? Yeah, gives the prophets Baal to prove which one's really God, and it brought judgment on those who weren't worshiping God. When Elijah called fire down from heaven on the 50 who came to get him and take him back to the king. Yeah, the fire on the top of Mount Sinai. Anybody who touched the mountain would die. So it often signified judgment. I'm guessing it's not just an example here of they had power to fool people, to pretend to be godly. I think it's also talking about bringing judgment on people. Do you, can I say it this way? Do you ever think that Christians, let's say a Christian baker who's got a bakery, do you ever think that the laws of the land judge them for their Christianity? You know what I'm referring to, right? Okay, do things like that, or sometimes they stacked against Christians and those who were, I think so. So it's anti-Christian judgment. And the thing that's interesting here, though, this is not political forces. It's going to tie the two together. This is false religion. False religion is actually supporting this. Maybe it'll be a little clearer as we read just a few more verses. They call fire down from heaven to the earth, full view of everyone. Because of the signs, it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast. You notice the tying of the two there? It's doing this on behalf of the first beast. It deceived the inhabitants of the earth. Please, if you're taking notes, write down 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 8 through 10. Those who do not love the truth will be deluded and will believe the lie. And it also talks about miraculous powers to deceive people. You don't really love the truth, you don't really want to find the truth, seek and you will find. You don't really want to, you'll probably be deceived and end up believing something that Satan wants you to believe. Anyway, they deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. Who's the beast who's wounded by the sword and yet lived? That's the beast out of the sea. In other words, we're talking about political powers. What's going on here? Somehow, some way, false religion is setting up some sort of image. Again, this is just a picture, so don't think of Daniel chapter 3, where they made this huge image to King Nebuchadnezzar, and everybody literally had to bow down to it. But the concept, false religion is going to do what? It's going to set up something that it actually encourages people to go along with the political forces that are anti-Christian. Okay, just my opinion here. I know separation of church and state sometimes, usually gets used in a very negative way. Anytime Christians want to do something, people talk about separation of church and state. Having said that, so I realize I get used wrong. But sometimes I'm scared to death when church and state get together. Because usually the only way church and state can get together is church has to water down something to make it palatable to everybody else. I was listening to a sermon recently. You guys know Bob Russell. A lot of you know Bob Russell. I go online every time. He's got another sermon out there. Let's do it. He was talking about several years ago. He had an opportunity to speak at a big political gathering, and he gave a little devotion, but he got to do the prayer. And they said, just make sure you don't say Jesus in your prayer. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking, is anybody here surprised? Are you surprised that, some political gathering, they let you pray, but they ask you not to say in Jesus' name? I'm not surprised.
Well, I'll give you a good example because I've been in Rotary, and the Rotary Club right here in Merritt Island got away from doing the traditional prayer in lieu of a bunch of canned prayers that Rotary had written that were very generic and, like, what's the point? A lot of, yeah, the same thing.
Yeah. I'm sorry to harp on this, but the next thing in my mind, this is just such a pet peeve of mine, is we can't even say, let's pray for people anymore. What we do as culture now, we say, let's have a moment of silence. If that's not the dumbest thing, yeah, let's have a moment, close your eyes and count to 10. Why? How is that supposed to benefit anybody? What's the purpose of that? The purpose of prayer is to actually benefit and make a difference when it's prayed in Jesus' name. But once you start going down that path, anyway, this is an example of that very thing. In John's day, it would be much more aggressive than our day, because people were literally being put to death. But I tell you what, there's still oppression. Yes.
So what happened with Russell's prayer?
What happens with what?
Russell's prayer.
Okay, Bob Russell was telling on himself because he said he was really bothered by the way he handled it. Because what happened was, it was right before he gets up there, and they say you're not allowed to say Jesus' name. So what he did was, at the close of his prayer, he says, and I offer this prayer in the name of the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And so all the Christians knew what he was saying, but it really bothered him, because it's kind of like he copped out. He said Jesus without saying Jesus. But he said if he had to do it over again, he would have just said, in Jesus' name, and just let people fire him, because, he's out of there. But anyway, yeah, so he kind of did that. I really admire Bob. I know he's been criticized a lot for some things, but the guy has really remained true and solid through the years, and with all that criticism. Okay. So they set up an image to honor the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, and rich and poor, and free and slave, to receive the mark on their right hands and on their foreheads. Okay, there's a couple things going on here. This idea to give breath to something, it's mimicking giving life. It's like the breath of life, but to empower. To empower everything that's against, to speak against and cause against everybody who refused to worship the image, and force this mark on the right hand on the forehead. I'm guessing almost everybody's heard the mark of the beast. And we're talking about the mark on the forehead, but it's interesting to me, anyway, that most people forget about it's on the hand and the forehead. It's not just the forehead, it's the hand. And maybe one of the reasons we forget that is when back, chapter 7, where God's people are sealed with a mark on their forehead. Okay, we commented on this before. What's the significance of it being on the forehead? It's obvious, you can see it. What does Jesus say? Let's go back to Matthew chapter 7. We already brought that up tonight. Matthew chapter 7. By their fruit you will know them. Okay, what does that mean? It means you can say whatever you want to say. I'm going to tell what you really believe by watching your life. What's obvious. How do you really live? How do you really live? Okay, we get that in chapter 7. Here we are in chapter 13, and we've got the mark on the right hand and on the forehead. In John's day, this would have been so much easier for everybody to perceive, because most soldiers and slaves were marked on the right hand and the forehead. So it was a sign that would signify you belong to somebody else or you're allegiant to somebody else. Same picture. It's obvious. It's on your forehead. But I got to think that maybe if we push this a little bit, I don't want to push it too far, but you know what? Frequently throughout the Bible, when you talk about somebody's hand, you're talking about what they do. When you talk about somebody's head, you're talking about what they think. So on the most basic level, it's showing allegiance, or it signifies who you really belong to, whether you realize it or not. I'm talking generically to people in our world, whether they realize it or not. You don't belong to God, you belong to Satan. You belong to Satan. It affects the way you think. It affects everything you do. Can I just get this off my chest? I really think I'm living in a day and age where people forgot how to think. Amen. Every day I read the news, and it's a torturous thing to do. I'll tell you more about this later, but Brown University, 2 weeks ago, did you read this in the news? Brown University retracted a study that they funded. Brown University. And the reason they retracted, it was a special study on gender dysphoria. And they retracted it because the results of their study they thought might be offensive to the transgender community. Don't bother me with the facts. You know what people want to believe on this issue. Which later on, if I have an opportunity to tell you about this, is fascinating what the study found. Because gender dysphoria, let me just give it to you in a second. Gender dysphoria is not natural. It's not something. It's probably not something that we would have if we didn't have social media. It's pretty much the result of the test. That's way too simplistic to say. That's pretty much the result of their findings that they retracted. Wow, do I get off subject? Okay, we're talking about the mark on the right hands of the foreheads. It's obvious. It affects what they do. It affects what they think. And it's playing right into Satan's hand, verse 17, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. He's going to explain that in just a little bit. But will it hurt you in the business world if you live by Christian standards all the time and you don't get along with everybody else and do stuff the way they do it? Sure. Have there been successful business people who are Christians? Sure. But the principle here is this. There's a pressure put on you to go along the way everybody else goes along. And I think that's exactly what it's talking about. He says, this calls for wisdom, verse 18. But the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man. That number is 666. Okay, this verse, the way it's been translated, has caused a lot of trouble for people, because when it says, but the person who has insight calculate the number, it's as though a lot of people say, look at this verse and say, hey, God's telling us we really need to figure this out, so 666, let's go ahead and what does this mean? Let's do the letter to number ratio thing. Well, every time you do you know what I'm talking about when you A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. Well, okay, there's a host of problems. I'm just going to give you a sample. Which language do you use? Well, Greek, you got to use Greek, right? We don't come up with very many good names in Greek. Unless you don't start with number 1. Unless you start with another number. And then you can come up with some interesting names. But I tell you what, if you do it in Latin, well, why would you do it in Latin? Well, because that's the language of the Roman Empire. You do it in Latin, and you can come up with a couple of Caesar's names. Okay. You can probably tell by the way I'm presenting this. I think that's a mistake. In fact, I think what he's emphasizing here is don't try to figure this out numerically. Try to understand the significance of this. What is it? 6. What is the number 6? 6 is one number shy of 7. Can I say it this way? It just fell short of 7. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. I think it emphasizes, well, I'm pretty confident throughout the book of Revelation, 6 emphasizes you missed it. And when you do anything throughout the whole Bible in triplicate, you're just emphasizing something. When you want to say God's really holy, say it's holy, holy, holy. Say 666, we're talking about, wow, they missed it. Boy, did they miss it. I find this extremely significant because we're talking about the ministry of the false prophet. It may sound good. It may sound like, hey, we can get along with government. And everything can work out well. We can have a good life here. It misses the mark. You have to give up something that God doesn't want you to have to give up. And I'm sorry if this offends you, but I tell you, the more I look at the book of Revelation, I don't think we should look for a good life here. I think we should do everything we can to make this life better. But our ultimate goal goes beyond this life. And that's so much part of the message of the book of Revelation. So, does this refer to any specific political, either political personality or religious personality? People have come up with a lot of different names, including Caesars and popes. And you're probably familiar with that. I wouldn't disagree with that, except I wouldn't say don't limit it to one Caesar or to one pope, right? It's just talking about the way Satan works throughout the years. Yes, thank you.
I was looking at this. It says, let the person with insight. To me, that makes it sound like somebody with a special God-given gift would only be one to be able to come up with that.
Yeah, and that's part of what makes this verse get some people going off on their special tangents and stuff like that. And I think that's unfortunate, because I think what he's talking about with this wisdom, some translations will talk about wisdom and insight, special understanding. I think he's just reminding us, hey Christian, you know stuff that other people don't know. You've got the rest of the Bible. Use the Bible and you can understand what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about people that play right into Satan's hand. So, and again, I don't want to push this too far, because I would not disagree with what some people have come up with. I just disagree with making it represent one single person. Because I'll be honest with you, I've looked at a lot of these. I've never seen something that makes sense. It's usually you have to use this number and start here, and all the letters line up, except you have to add 2. And when you add 2 here, then you get this guy's name. So. Okay, we've got a few more, we've got 20 more minutes, let's go ahead. Chapter 14, I looked, and there before me was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion. How did chapter 13 open up? We have the dragon, and where's he standing? On the shore. Jesus said there was 2 guys who went out to build homes. One built his house on the sand, the other one built his house on the rock. That's exactly right. In chapter 13, the dragon's standing on the sand. Chapter 14, the Lamb of God is standing on the mountain. I just love this picture. And very visual. I do think he wants us to picture pictures without getting sucked in, right? It's not the picture, but picture the picture to get the point, right? So here we have the Lamb, and he's standing on not just any mountain. What mountain is he standing on? Mount Zion. Who's with him? 144,000. Okay, we already had this back in chapter 7. Verse 4, 144,000, 12 times 12 is 144. The idea here, you take 12 from the Old Testament, 12 tribes, 12 apostles from the New Testament. The number 1,000 would be ultimate completeness. It's a great symbolic way of referring to all of God's people. I really think, and I think I pointed this out too, back in chapter 7, he uses several different designations. He says 144,000. He also calls them a great uncountable throng of people, hosts of people. But he associates them with God's people. And here, these are the ones associated with the Lamb. They're standing on Mount Zion. Why is that so significant? Hebrews chapter 12, verse, is it 22 or 28? 22. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 22, 23, 24. He talks about we've come to the Mount Zion, the heavenly Mount Zion, and he tells us who it is. You know who the heavenly Mount Zion is? It's God's church. It's God's church. Well, this is another way of picturing God's people. So Hebrews 12, 22 through 24 would be a good cross-reference for verse 1. So here's the Lamb on Mount Zion, 144,000. The 144,000 had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. Okay, back in chapter 7, we knew they were sealed. Now we know what the seal is. It's obvious. What's obvious? They belong to God. They belong to Jesus. Verse 2, and I heard the sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters, like the loud peal of thunders. The sound I heard was like that of a harpist playing his harp. Okay. When I think of a harp, I don't think of thunder. Okay, what's the point he's making here? We've seen this several times already, and we're going to see it again. When he talks about the sound of many rushing waters, how many have been to Niagara? Right? You're staying close enough, you can't hear anybody. Right? Many rushing waters, that's a loud sound. Thunder, you get close enough to a lightning bolt, you won't hear for a while because it's that loud. Okay? So he's talking about loud. When we use harps, we're talking about something that's beautiful. So when you put these two together, no, harps are not loud. What he's saying is this is loud. Why is it important to be loud? Because if you're loud enough, everybody's going to hear it. Right? And you just can't ignore it. I just find it so easy to be loud. Cannot ignore, cannot not pay attention to. You have to listen to this. It is beautiful. So here's the significance. We've got the Lamb standing with his people, and then we've got this loud voice that's also beautiful. Verse 3, and they sang a new song. Here's God's people singing a new song. What's the old song that they sang? Well, when God's people were rescued in the Old Testament, there's a song of Moses. And what was that all about? Saving them from saving them from Egypt and the Egyptians and through the Red Sea and Pharaoh and his chariots and all that stuff. That's the song of Moses. What's the new song? We no longer remember being delivered from the land of Egypt. We remember being delivered from sin. So our song is the song of the Lamb. It's a song of salvation. So it's loud and beautiful. We sing this song before the throne and before the four living creatures. Oh, we haven't seen them in a while. Remember the four living creatures, all nature before God, representing all nature before God. Four living creatures and the elders. How many elders are there? 24. 24 elders, remember? We got 24 elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. Back in chapter 2, verse 17, letters to 7 churches, it says, I'm going to give you a name nobody else knows. Only you know. Okay, what's the significance of nobody else knowing your name? Nobody else has power over you. You're mine. You belong to me. Name signifies significance, right? Character. And you belong to me and nobody else has power over you. Well, this is a song. We have a way of life that brings joy to us that other people just don't get it. In fact, you can't get it from the outside. If you get it, you're part of us. Right? To fully understand this. Verse 4, these are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they remained as virgins. They followed the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among mankind and offered as first fruits to God and the Lamb. This idea of not defiling themselves is playing off the idea that even in the Old Testament, before the troops went out to fight, they weren't supposed to be at home having sex. They were supposed to set themselves aside for a period of time and just focus on the battle. Okay, it's playing off that idea. It is not saying that there's something wrong with sexual relationships inside of marriage. We know that from several different places. Ephesians chapter 5 is a great one, but the best one, I think, is Hebrews chapter 13. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4 says, let the marriage bed remain undefiled. That's where God wants sex to be. We're in the book of Revelation, it's apocalyptic literature. When he talks about being undefiled sexually, what is he talking about? He's talking about don't commit spiritual adultery. Remain faithful to God. Set yourselves aside for God, right? and be followers. Follow the Lamb. So again, it's a military picture, right? Because that's what soldiers did before battle. And then it's like you can prepare yourself for battle, but once you get in battle, you better follow your general. That's the picture here. We're pure, we're committed to the Lord, and we follow Him. He's the head of the church. So whatever He says goes. They're presented as first fruits was an offering presented to God. Doesn't that make you think of Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2? Present your bodies as living sacrifices, holy, acceptable, pleasing unto Him. That's what we do with our lives. Here you go, God. No lie was, verse 5, no lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. Okay, the lie is associated with Satan and those who follow him. Verse 6. Then I saw another angel flying in midair. We've seen this before. We had this eagle in midair. What was the eagle saying? Whoa, whoa, whoa. Why in midair? This is signifying, we're not talking about up in heaven. This is something that can be seen by all, right? But why up in the air? Because he's off the ground and nobody can attack him. Nobody can touch him. But it's something that everybody's going to hear, be made known to everybody. Right? So here's what the angel is doing. This angel is flying midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth. Okay, this is another way of picturing what we saw in the first 4 seals. What was the very first seal? It was the rider of the white horse. What did he go do? Went out and conquered. Rider of the white horse, however, in chapter 19 would be Jesus. If this is Jesus going out to conquer, it's probably picturing the gospel. What's this picturing? It's picturing, again, there's another way of looking at all this stuff going on. Beast out of the sea, beasts of the land. We've got political powers. We've got false prophets. But you know what? God's message is still getting out there. There's still people who are faithful to God's word, and it's having its effect. In fact, I meant to read this earlier, so let me just do this now. Flip over to 1 John chapter 4. Since we're talking about the true message versus the false message. 1 John chapter 4. I think this is a great passage to have in mind. Not the Gospel of John, but 1 John. 1 John chapter 4, it says in verse 1, Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world. This is how you recognize the Spirit of God. Every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. But every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus is not from God. Flip over to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Keep going back a few more pages. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. Last chapter of 1 Thessalonians, it says in verse 19, do not quench the Spirit. Does that sound familiar? That's a famous verse. Don't quench the Spirit. Verse 20, do not treat prophecies with contempt. Verse 21, but test them all. Hold on to what is good. Reject every kind of evil. Okay. The reason I like taking these two passages together, there's a lot of these kind of warnings in the New Testament. But the reason I like taking these two together is he says, just remember, there's a lot of false prophets out there. But you know what? Sometimes you become calloused. It's kind of like, I don't want to listen to any of that stuff. That's why I like 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of bad stuff. You need to ignore it. But don't shut everything down. Weigh them out. There's some good out there. Listen to the good. Take it in. But have your antennas up. Just be on the lookout. Because not all of it's good. So weigh these things. I think that's kind of the big message here. A lot of false prophecy, but the good is still getting out there. Verse 7, he said in a loud voice, fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Isn't that interesting? Part of the gospel message is that judgment's coming. Judgment's coming. Worship him who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and the springs of the water. A loud voice, you cannot ignore him. And he needs to be worshipped. If you don't worship him, you're going to be judged. Second angel, verse 8, second angel followed and said, fallen, fallen is Babylon. This is interesting. The first angel is talking about proclamation of the message. Second angel comes along and says, bad guys are doomed. Right? Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. Okay, Babylon sometimes in the book of Revelation is used to refer to Rome, could refer to Rome. Before Rome became a power, Babylon would refer to Babylon. Could refer to any. Okay, what did Babylon represent to God's people, especially in the Old Testament? What did it represent to the Hebrew people in the Old Testament?
Conquerors.
Yeah. Exile and take away. But remember, do you remember the times where God called Babylon Nebuchadnezzar his servant? Why?
He was going to punish his people.
He was going to use them to punish them. And when God's people complained and said, yeah, but they're bad, they need to be punished, how did God answer that? They're going to be punished. You're going to use them to punish other people. You're not going to turn around and punish them because they are bad. Right? Probably represents any evil power that oppresses, especially evil powers that oppress God's people. What's the message here? Well, it's kind of the message, same message that he gave to his people in the Old Testament. Yeah, I'm going to punish them too. Well, guess what? God's going to punish the evil forces. So the first angel is the idea of the gospel being proclaimed. Second angel, fallen is Babylon the Great. By the way, it's interesting that it signifies the great. We're not just talking about evil forces. There have been evil forces that are, I was going to say universal. There have been world powers politically. But I tell you what, the world's getting very, very small. And there are influence. Have you guys seen? I know you're going to say, Mark, you watch way too much of the news. Have you seen this picture of this little girl with the big buggy eyes? It's real popular. It's a I don't know if it's a site. I don't know what it is, but it's a thing that kids click on, and the whole purpose of it is to get kids to commit suicide. Yeah. There's somebody who knows more about this than I can explain to you, but it's just... Well, the problem with the internet is that it doesn't just happen in the United States. There are evil influences that are global. Fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries. Okay, spiritual adultery represents what? Unfaithfulness to God. Unfaithfulness to God. How is it that people become unfaithful to God? They get drunk. What does drunkenness represent? Loss of judgment. Loss of ability to think properly. This idea of drinking wine, by the way, the cup, is often associated with drink this cup. And it's not just wine, it's a cup of judgment. It's as though the wine has been poisoned. And judgment is coming. Well, Babylon has made people do that, has diluted them, has influenced them, and gotten them away from a commitment to God. The third angel, verse 9, third angel followed them in a loud voice. If anyone worships the beast and its image and receives its mark on their forehead or on their head, they too will drink the wine of God's fury. What's the difference between what he just said and right now? The second angel is talking about Babylon, the major world powers. They're going to be judged. The third angel says any individual who follows will also be judged. So it's like big, plural, everybody to the individual. And they're going to experience, well, this is what it says. They're going to drink the wine of God's fury, verse 10, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath. They will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. I know this is a bad place to stop. I'm going to stop right there because we're almost out of time. But this idea of judgment, I'm reading some books recently that really have a problem with the judgment of God. And I see it frequently. People want to focus on the love of God. I'm all for that. But the Bible equally focuses on the love of God and the judgment. And if people miss the love of God, the only thing that's left is the judgment. Why are the angels watching this? I just found this kind of interesting. You know what makes... Well, I'll play off those crazy videos. Those are some crazy videos we saw the last 2 Sundays, aren't they? All these people crashing and burning. You know what makes that worse? What happens to you every time you fall? What's the first thing you do when you get up?
See who's looking.
Yeah. Because it's worse if people see it. Right? I mean, it hurt. But if a whole bunch of people saw it, and if they're going like this, it makes it worse. You know what makes judgment worse? Everybody sees it. Everybody sees it. The only way you're wrong, everybody knows you're wrong. I think it really is trying to emphasize just how bad judgment is. Questions, comments up to this point? Let's pray.